I'm joined by my co-curator, Nina Vincent, who is joining us and currently lives in Paraíba, in the northeastern part of Brazil. And she works with the historical and the artistic intangible heritage of Brazil. So we are pleased to welcome Tanya Lukin Linklater to Wapatah's second In Conversation event, which is part of a series of the Arctic Amazon Project Knowledge Exchange workshops. And it's in support of the upcoming publication, Arctic Amazon Networks of Global Indigeneity. This series is developed by our Wapatah team as part of our global indigenous outreach initiatives, which is led by Brittany Fitzulak-Bergen and Natalia Chestopalova. The virtual event series today and this particular series is hosted by the generous support of the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council Connections Grant, the Appleton Foundation, Nancy McCain and Bill Morneau, Ian and Kiki Delaney, Michelle Kerner, and Michael O'Dane, and in collaboration with the Power Plant Contemporary Art Gallery here in Toronto. The Arctic Amazon project will culminate in several milestones. The first is a major publication titled Arctic Amazon Networks of Global Indigeneity, and second, which is an online educational resource hosted by the Wapatah Center, and third, this coming fall in September 30th, the Arctic Amazon exhibition in partnership with the Power Plant Gallery of Contemporary Art and the Ryerson Image Center. Now I'd like to introduce Tanya. Tanya Lukin Linklater. There's performances, works for camera, installations, and writing center on the histories of Indigenous people's lives, lands, and structures of sustenance. Her performances in relation to objects in exhibitions, scores, and ancestral belongings generate what she has come to call felt structures. In 2022, her solo exhibition, My Mind is with the Weather, will open at the Oakville Galleries in Oakville, Ontario, and will tour to the Contemporary Art Gallery in Vancouver and the Southern Alberta Art Gallery in Lethbridge, Alberta. The work is currently on view in the What Water Knows and Land Remembers, which is the Toronto Biennial of Art for 2022. And she will also participate in this year's IPHAN Triennial, which is in Japan. And last year, in 2021, she participated in the soft water hard stone at the New Museum's Triennial, that's the museum in New York City, and in Soft Power, a conversation for the future at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. In that same year, in 2021, she received the Herb Alpert Award in the Arts for Visual Art. Tanya is Alutiiq, Supiaq, and her homelands are in the Kodiak Island archipelago of southwestern Alaska. Welcome, Tanya. You were just in California working on a project. Remember last week we were talking with you. Can you tell us more about the project that you were engaged in?
Well, I was participating in an artistic residency at Cal Arts, which was in relation to the Herb Alpert Award that I received in 2021. And so I was undertaking some studio visits with graduate students, giving some talks, but also writing a great deal and visiting the Pacific Ocean, which was important for me as someone who is an island person and who hasn't been to the ocean for about 2.5 years until that time due to the pandemic. So I was writing a great deal about a project that we're going to be speaking about a bit later. And visiting the Pacific Ocean as much as I could as well. Well,
speaking of the Pacific Ocean, and it's just amazing each time I fly over it. Sometimes when I head to Australia, but this is going to be the formation of what I'd like us to talk about in the next few moments, because in 1964, the state of Alaska, where you were born and raised, experienced a massive earthquake, which became known as the Good Friday, which is this coming Friday, by the way. But in 1964, it happened on Good Friday and was called the Good Friday earthquake. And as a little boy, I remember just coming off the res and into the city and watching on television this amazing earthquake, which I never knew about its magnitude, and I now hear that it has been the most powerful North American earthquake ever recorded. This is massive, massive amount when you actually listen to scientists talk about this earthquake. And it lasted for about 4.5 minutes. I just imagine the 4.5 minutes of terror of those who were affected by it. And a work that you did a few years ago, back in 2018, and which we'll be showing in the exhibition, the Arctic Amazon exhibition, a work which you call "They Fall the Ground Beneath You," and it concerns the moments of the earthquake and how it affected Alaskan indigenous communities, which of course I never knew back then as a young boy. But this work features, there's two parts to this film. The first is a personal response to the earthquake itself. And then the second part of it is in response to a fellow Alaskan, an Alaskan who's in the exhibition, the Arctic Amazon, and that's Sonia Kelleher-Combs. So can you tell us the stories, for example, that we just never hear about by the local indigenous folks from, as I understand it, the tribal archives?
Yeah. So at the time, I didn't realize my sister had spent some time with the tribal archives as well and gathered, uh, sort of really looking at not only the experience of the Great Alaska or Good Friday earthquake and tsunami, which destroyed our village of Afognak, and a number of other low-lying villages in Alaska and devastated cities like the small city of Kodiak and other cities um, in Prince William Sound or Anchorage. There were, impacts sort of in that entire region and elsewhere that I don't know as much about. But I remember seeing some of these photographic images as a young person, as a youth, and they're quite remarkable. But my sister had was thinking about this move from our ancestral village of Afognak to Port Lions, which was built sort of in response. And so she had spent some time in her master's paper really looking at that shift from one village to the other and what that meant for our community members. And not all of our community members chose to relocate to Port Lions, but our family did. So, or most of our family did. Our immediate and much of our extended family chose to relocate. But I was around the 50th, just after the 50th anniversary of the earthquake. I was writing for a course with my mentor Dylan Robinson at Queen's, and it was a course on Indigenous and settler affect and writing. And so he really gave us the space to write in relation to histories or what was, what some of our concerns were. And I was really thinking about this shift in our world, which was one of many shifts that have happened over time for our Alutiiq or Supiaq people. That there's this sort of series of ways in which our universe or our world was kind of upended. First and foremost with Russian imperialism or, subsequently a number of colonialisms that have, happened on our island. But I wanted to center the story in the experience of members of our community. And there had been a number of oral histories that had been gathered and are available on the Native Village of Afognak website. That's administered, and as a member, I have access to those oral histories. But I also remember growing up asking about it sometimes with my family, And so those oral histories describe the strange behavior of animals. They describe the ash falling as well, like snow. Or actually, I don't know why I'm thinking of that, but that's actually another experience. Sorry, I'm confusing the two. Um, but they describe also the way in which the ground was moving under their feet for extended periods of time, and the sound of it as well. Um, and in my own family, there's a description of how my grandmother, my late grandmother, Zenaida Sheratin Lukin, carried my auntie, my youngest auntie, on her back, who was 3 at the time, and the kids were following behind. So the rest of my aunties and uncles and my dad were following behind her, and they had to sort of race across this lake that was still frozen but was breaking up behind them as they were running towards the mountain, which is where they all stayed for 3 days. And my dad also describes this in the archive. This getting to high ground because they knew that the tsunami was coming, and it completely destroyed the village. And then they describe sort of coming back down to the village after the 3 days, and just everything, they could see the lines where the water had come in the buildings. They had a brand new community hall that was broken up and was destroyed. There was just this kind of devastation that I think was, sort of unknowable in a way, until it happened. And then as someone who's a descendant of, my family who experienced that, in a way it's unknowable for me as well. So I'm just trying to sort of gather those histories and place them within this work, They Fall the Ground Beneath You, which is a work for camera. I guess also the thing that really stayed with me was thinking about the way in which my grandmother, saved her children, and what her role and responsibility was in that moment, even though I'm sure she was deeply afraid, and I don't know what she was feeling. But it really made me think about my role as a mother, as a relative, as an auntie, and sort of my responsibility for my children and for the youth that are also sort of in my life, the kind of way in which I'm in relation to them, and how I care for them, and how I also need to tell these stories so that they'll know that this is what happened to Afognak. This is what happened to our people in Afognak. And now our family lives in Port Lions, and that's the village we visit mostly. So it's a kind of a significant experience encountering the oral histories in the tribal archive. And I do contrast that with a series of stories that are sort of reprinted or retold in the Anchorage Daily News, which really focus on kind of wealthy upper middle class folks in Anchorage. And so these other stories are held within the tribal archive, or sort of on the periphery. And for me, because Afognak and Port Lions is the center of my world in so many ways, that's where I go in order to learn about that shared, felt, and lived history with our people.
It is really remarkable. This really, you can see this process of uncovering narratives and how personal it is for you in this work. And of course, seeing it, you can see that you chose to show these young girls and women in this film. So can you tell us more about who are these girls and these women, and the way you chose to show them, their hands, and why they are shown like that in the film?
Yeah, so the two of the youth are so they're youth and children, so some teenagers and some preteens. Two of them are my daughters, Mina and Sasa, and then the other two, one is my niece Tessa, and one is our little cousin Keisha. And I was thinking about like I said, sort of this role and responsibility of myself as an Alutiiq or Supiaq woman and relative. But I've also been thinking sort of longer term about women's narratives, and so I wanted to, center that, but I also wanted to ask them some questions. So while I keep the film silent, or the work for camera silent, we had a series of conversations about their experiences, because I really feel that oftentimes we think about Indigenous knowledge as being transferred from elders to younger generations, but in my experience, it can also go the other way, where young people have so much to teach us and we have so much to learn from them. Because if we think about lived experience as one of the ways in which we learn, or how we come to understand the world, they also have lived experience at a different time and a different context that they can share with us. I find that they're, so much further ahead in some of their thinking than I was at their age or ages. And so we really talked about their experiences in education. We talked about histories. Some of those experiences are difficult. They talked about, experiences of racism and sexism within their classrooms or within the education system. And then we started to think a little bit about what it means that, their grandmothers are survivors of Indian residential schools in Canada. So I wanted to keep the conversation silent because I didn't want to fix them in time and sort of their thinking in this moment. I wanted to kind of keep that for them and for that moment with each other. But I just speak sort of broadly about that conversation. And then I was interested in how in Alaska Native dance, we tell stories with our hands, we gesture, we use gesture quite a bit. And so I kind of saw this as an opportunity to sort of abstract it even further. So I consider Alaska Native dance an abstract form, because if you don't know the stories, you're watching the movement, and sometimes you'll understand parts of it, but I also just enjoy it as a form. It's a beautiful form. It's it's humorous, and everyone dances from very, very young until very, very old. And we have, some phenomenal athletes and also some very nuanced dancers who are incredibly funny. But I was interested in the ways in which we also tell stories with the body, and how we tell narratives through embodiment. But I wanted to make it also accessible for the girls, many of whom are dancers. They dance fancy shawl and jingle dance. But I wanted to sort of work with them. And then sort of the last component was this material, which is a material that I had specifically made by Anong Beam. She's the daughter of the late Carl Beam, and she's on Manitoulin Island. Some of you might be familiar with Beam Paints, which is this really amazing business that she has, where she's sourcing materials and she's making paints, and it's quite wonderful. But I had asked her to make copper, to make a copper material that could be placed on their body that would be safe. And so she did. She made that specifically for this. And I was thinking about copper partly because I live in Nipissing Anishinaabe territory. I live in a place where I'm familiar with, and I've certainly been able to witness over time, different Anishinaabe women water walkers. And of course, I'm familiar with Josephine Mondeman's water walks around the Great Lakes, where she would carry water in a copper vessel. And partly, I don't understand the sort of full complexity of that action, but partly, she's sort of speaking for the water, speaking with water. And there are many Anishinaabe teachings around water here in this region. And so that's kind of a context that continuously sort of is present for me living in this territory. I was thinking about how those teachings, the little that I know of them, as I'm not from this region, but that they speak about the water, the need for the connection between women and water, and so I guess in a way I wanted to also sort of honor these youth and these children and gesture towards that. In this instance, of course, the water is in the story of what happened to Afognak, the water is destructive. So it's kind of a complex project in that way. Mm-hmm.
You speak about the connection to women and water. I want you to now tell us a bit about that connection with Sonia Kelleher-Combs, because as I said, she's a fellow Alaskan. She's in the exhibition of the Arctic Amazon this coming fall. And there was some inspiration, I believe you said, that what is that connection? Maybe I think it'd be quite interesting to hear what you have to say about that.
Yeah, so originally this work was made for this exhibition, which you're seeing an image of right now, which was at Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art. And there were a number of curators, Mindy Bisa, Manuela Wellhoffman, and Candace Hopkins. And Candace had asked me if I would consider making a work in response to an artist within the exhibition, which I've done in the past in different instances. I've responded to the work of Bo Dick and Rita Latondra, and also placed myself in relation to histories of Maria Tallchief. And so when we went through the list of artists, I immediately wanted to respond to the work of Sonia Kelleher-Combs, who is, I just really deeply respect her practice. And through this process was able to learn more about her practice and how she spends a great deal of time at fish camp and on the land with her family, with her extended relatives, and how she also brings a number of objects into her work that are directly from the land, that are found by her family members or herself, and how she's sort of working in this relationship or this continuum between older forms of artistic work, such as sewing, which I also deeply respect, and sort of her really contemporary practice. And so my response was twofold. One was this work for camera, They Fall the Ground Beneath You, which you can see installed, which was installed on what I call a performance platform. And then the second was a performance with two dancers in the exhibition, specifically sort of in relation to the video installation, but also in relation to this work by Sonia as well, which is on the wall, Orange Curl. And these performances are often site-specific and are thinking about architecture and are thinking about sort of what's in the space. And while we took as our primary point of departure Sonia's work, you'll notice that there are other works in the exhibition. So Marie Watt, Chinupa Hanska-Luger, and then there were other works by Jeffrey Gibson and other folks as well, sort of in close proximity. And so all of that came to sort of inform that performance.
Okay, I'll do a big shift now to another work that I want to talk about. But before we talk about it, because I think it has some relevance to the story I want to tell, because I think there's the connections of just I don't know, there was something powerful about a story I once heard that I wanted to use as an example of what I call Indigenous visual knowledge. It's about California, an elderly California basket maker who was teaching a class of students, and I can only assume they were non-Indigenous students. I mean, they could have been Indigenous students as well. And they were being shown the traditional forms of basket making. And so over the course of a few days, as they were going through the process, they'd be gathering grasses. They'd go out, they were of course out on the land gathering grasses, various types of grasses. But at each stage of the process, it required for the woman to sing songs, right? And as I said, this went on for a few days until one day, in almost exasperation, maybe, one student puts up her hand and says, when are we going to be making baskets? She says, all we're doing is singing. And the elderly woman, the teacher, says, you are making baskets. You are. And she said, because the songs they were singing, a song is a basket made visual. And I've often found this response to be remarkably profound in its simplicity, for it seemed to give me a way to view our ancestral belongings, which are in museums, and I've seen them in museums around the world. And each time I go into a museum, it seems like these cultural belongings feel sad, right? And they just feel unconnected because they've been disconnected from the source communities. They've been disconnected from songs, for example, and there's something lifeless about them sometimes that I see. So museums and art galleries, as we all know, are very interested in them as objects, not so much as in their songs, for example. Maybe that's changing. But anyhow, in your work that you created, the second work back in 2019, An Amplification Through Many Minds, which was done at the Phoebe Hearst Museum in San Francisco, you encountered ancestral belongings, your ancestral belongings. And so tell us why this encounter was so special for you and how it became a basis for the video.
Yeah, so this is a kind of unruly project, and it's difficult for me to speak about because I'm writing about this right now, and I feel as though there are so many components of it or parts of it that are all sort of connected, and so it's a bit difficult to speak about because the question is really sort of a significant question, I think, in my life right now in terms of the ways in which I'm reconnecting with ancestral belongings and sort of activating them in the present moment. I guess I think a lot about how they used to be within our homelands and with our ancestors, with our families, with our relatives, with the land and the water, with the weather of my island. They were in this sort of set of relations with the world around them. And for many of us, I know that there are different kinds of belongings. Some are highly energetic and they have a shua or a spirit or personhood or agency. And some have different kinds of energetic exertions. And so I tend to work with belongings that aren't necessarily considered, quote unquote sacred, only because our people are, recovering from and sort of in this mode of repairing ourselves after sort of the violence of Russian imperialism and ongoing colonialisms in America. And so we're sort of in this space of that we don't always have a framework for the way in which to interact with these belongings, although some people do and they feel comfortable doing that. And I think each of us have sort of different roles and responsibilities and in those sets of relations that we undertake in those visits. Many of my people have visited collection storage spaces over the decades. One of the first was my relative, the late Helen Semyonov, who traveled to the Alphonse Pinart Museum in France. Or she was the first one to go to that particular collection, in my understanding. And, I would read about these encounters that people had, and sometimes I would hear about them, our people, when they went, and when they encountered masks or other belongings, they would weep at times. They talk about feeling a presence, with those belongings. And so in these encounters, there was something that was happening, that was happening between them and between the belonging. And So I've been thinking a lot about that for many years, and this, as well as a couple of other projects, I've been able to begin this process of visiting collections and encountering belongings. And in that encounter, that's what I'm sort of documenting. You know, I'm documenting that experience of my encounter, as well as others' encounters. One of the sort of key ideas that I'm working through is, you know, the museum is weatherproof, and it sort of suspends the ancestral or cultural belongings in a specific time, you know, through preservation and through repelling, you know, humidity and water and repelling pests as well. So there's this placing of, you know, DDT and arsenic and other materials on the belongings that make them then a little bit harder for us to interact with. You know, we have to wear gloves and we have to be mindful when we're interacting with them. And the places that they stay in are difficult as well. You know, they're often, you know, in darkness most of the time for decades. And if we believe that they have energy or personhood or agency or Shua, it's a difficult life for them, you know, over those long periods of time. And so when we visit them, I don't know if activating them is actually the right term. It's more about this sort of reciprocal exchange that happens between us, where we're sensing and listening and being in relation, and they're also speaking to us through the designs on their bodies, through information that's been left to us by our ancestors. And I think a lot about how we're spending time with those belongings to decipher information that has been left to us by our ancestors. So sort of broadly, that's why this project is important. These, I interact with Alutiiq or Supiaq sewing bags from my island, as well as an Alutiiq or Supiaq parka, and also that's, for some reason, it's really overly lit right now, the image. It's a little bit of a better image. I'm not sure what's happening, but maybe we can try to adjust the image. And I'm also interacting with belongings that are not from my island. So they're Anungan, they're from the Aleutian chain, they're baskets. These were collected through trade with the Alaska Commercial Collection. We don't know the names of the makers, and we don't have a lot of information regarding them. We have some information. And so in this work, I'm thinking about how we are with them and alongside them, in relation to them, and how we also bring weather to the museum through our breath, through our tears. You know, we're bringing a kind of weather through embodiment and being in relation. And I'm still working out that idea. So it's the first time I think I've said this publicly. So it's taking me some time to kind of work through what that means. Emily Changer is actually a curator who first suggested that I bring weather to the museum. But I've been trying to think through, well, what does that mean? You know, what does that mean? Because I'm only one of many people who is undertaking this work, not only from my island, but across Turtle Island and elsewhere, where people are repatriating belongings and visiting them and working through processes to have them return to their homelands.
Nina, would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, I think it's really beautiful what you're saying. It resonates with so many, there are so many different attempts to relate to objects, so-called artifacts, to these cultural belongings in museums. And very often that means indigenous peoples around the world reclaiming those objects, maybe trying to shift the narrative, trying to question and change those museum institutions. And all those attempts, they have their own place and their own struggle, their own history. But your process is so particular of like trying to establish its own process of relating in a contemporary way, of creating a particular relation in the present with these objects, right? It's so so interesting and moving. It's a process of addressing these ancestral belongings and discovering this relation in the process, right? Can you, do you like to talk a little bit more about that? How this happens, how this idea of addressing these ancestral belongings happen in the process of activating these objects, placing them on the body, dancing, singing.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I should start by saying in the old days, things like or beings like masks were activated through performance, you know, through song, through dance, and of course, there's all of the sort of garments that were activated in that way as well, and other belongings that were activated and continue to be activated in performance, although possibly sort of in a different way at this time. And I think a little bit about how performance really does something in the world, you know, that songs do something in the world, that dances do something in the world. And while I work with contemporary dancers, I still think that there is something that happens when myself or the dancers, you know, interact with those belongings, you know, at this time and in this moment. So I suppose I could say that I hadn't intended to sing to the Alutiiq sewing bags or Supiaq sewing bags, but I did. I kept the work silent in sections because I wanted to keep that song for that experience between us. And, you know, that was a way for me to be generous with them and to be with them. And of course, there are longer histories of people singing to them. As Gerald described, there's, you know, the ways in which many people sing all the way through the making, you know, through the gathering of grasses, the curing of grasses, that there's songs along the way. And I've heard that said in relation to making kayaks at home as well. When I was young, I was an intern in the Alutiiq Museum, and I remember that there was a description of the ways in which we would sing a song for each part of building the kayak, which was built to the sort of specifications of an individual's body. You know, it was meant to fit that person, and there was a process. And I guess in my work generally, I'm really interested in process and sort of documenting process. So for example, what you're seeing now is an image of what I called an open rehearsal for camera. So this is at the SFMOMA's White Box. We had a series of open rehearsals in preparation for shooting the work in the collection storage space at the Hearst Museum of Anthropology. I guess also, you know, in this address, I'm thinking about, you know, what are my strengths? And so I sort of did an impromptu oration with these belongings, thinking about how they function in the world, asking a series of questions that I have about them, and just being in relation to them. Because I think that in the energy of our voice, you know, there are sound waves there that are these vibrations are sort of entering into that work, into that belonging and staying with it. And so that's important. But also I think about the strength of the dancers that I'm working with and their generousness and what they bring to this work as well. And so Ivani Abinmalo, who is in the work, I think we're going to, actually, I think Gerald has a question about this also. So maybe I'll let Gerald ask this question before I move to that.
I do. And yes, I do. Thank you. indeed, I think this idea, and I've certainly seen elders, you know, going into institutions and museums, whether it's feeding the masks or addressing sacred medicine bundles, or something to the degree that there's a reverence. And as you say, it's because art museums and museums treat our things, or our ancestral belongings as objects, right? When I think of objects, I often think of that as a third person, where we don't talk about something because it's in third person. But it's a curious thing when you see elders or even knowledge keepers who start to address these things as as you say, in a personhood, a relationship, a subjecthood is given. So you have a conversation, and I've seen that over and over and over again. And it's these kind of things that are difficult, I think, for Western viewers perhaps to comprehend. And it's just this idea. So that to me is so common. And to me, it's that part of that cultural knowledge, that the visual knowledge that I talk about, and how we have to start thinking quite differently to get out of that Western frame of mind to an Indigenous frame of thinking. And in the video that I wanted you to talk about, it shows a young lady, and you'll introduce it, please. And when she's dancing, she goes up to the storage facility where you were before, it seems like, and you were there before. But she goes up and quietly just approaches where these objects, these things are, and it's as if she's standing back, and she starts to dance. And to me, it's this kind of, I don't know, there's something about it, and I personally interpret it as this the objects are struggling to be released, and that she's creating a sovereign space. So could you talk about that as we play the video? It's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful.
Yeah, the dancer is Ivani Abenmalo, who I've had a chance to work with since 2016 on several projects, and she's Maliseet, and we began working together in Montreal. She's trained as a contemporary dancer and also as a fancy shawl dancer, and even the top that she's wearing in this was a top that was gifted to her that she wears with her regalia, and she chose to wear that for the duration of this project. And I really respect those kinds of decisions where she feels as though, I mean, our garments are very important to us in terms of them being handmade and sewn and prayed over and presented and then worn for specific purposes. And so in this way, I don't know why she wanted to wear that garment specifically, but of course, I honor that decision. And I think it might be because we'd had such good conversations about ancestral and cultural belongings and this work that, that I was undertaking and that I was asking the dancers to respond to, which she did, and the other dancers did, Kainwen Gobert and Dana Rosales, in just really, thoughtful, beautiful, generous ways. But she specifically we hadn't intended to shoot there in that specific place because it's an older space in the basement of what was called Kroeber Hall, which has now been unnamed Kroeber Hall, which is its own history, which is in the same building that the Hearst Museum of Anthropology is located in. So Alfred Kroeber is considered, sort of a really important figure in Western anthropology and in California specifically, but is also affiliated with some very contentious histories. And Berkeley, UC Berkeley, decided to unname, had received a proposal and voted in favor of unnaming that building in 2020, 2021, around there. So after this project had happened. But a sort of other unfolding history in the project was that there was the Sonoma County or Kincaid wildfires in Northern California, which really halted the plans for the shoot that was supposed to happen in a different collection storage space that is more state-of-the-art, is much more contemporary, has different systems in place. And I felt like that would be a better place for the dancers to be because it was, a bit cleaner and, a bit newer. And I just felt like maybe it was a little bit of safer, for the dancers to be in. But the UC Berkeley campus was notified that the entire campus would be shut down due to blackouts that were happening, rolling blackouts that were happening across the Bay Area due to the wildfires, in an effort to stop the electrical grids from sparking, which were causing a number of the fires. And the electrical grids were sparking because they had not been taken care of properly over a long period of time. And so PG&E, which was the company at the time, or is the company, has subsequently been dealing with all kinds of litigation as a result of these wildfires. And so that wildfire doubled in size, from one day to the next. And so we were given a very short period of time before the entire campus shut down to sort of enter into that space and to shoot this. And it wasn't at all how I had intended, to do it. And then in that moment, I asked Ivani to do this, and she did. And it just became such a powerful sort of expression of being in the place where those Alutiiq sewing bags have lived for decades. I don't even know how long. She's in direct correlation or relation to the exact kind of locker where they live that's, locked. And I also notice, which is a little hard, via Zoom to really sort of experience, but there's a very loud HVAC system. It's almost like a white noise that's just sort of perpetually on. And her feet are disrupting that. Her breath is disrupting that. And I'm sort of just outside of the view of the camera, and I'm encouraging her as she's doing it. I'm speaking to her. I'm saying, oh, that's great. Yeah, keep going, breathe. And so all of that's sort of happening in that moment. And for me, that's sort of an extension of, the songs that I sing, the oration that I share, because it's another kind of energy that she's exerting to kind of disrupt the space, but also for those belongings to hear, and to sense behind those doors.
Well, Tanya, I've worked in museums and been in museums for so many years. that I feel that that's probably the reason I'm aging so gracefully. uh, Thank you very much. It's been really, really great to have you. Thank you, Nina, because it's just been great, and I'm looking forward to the fall exhibition, the senior work on display and present in relation to others, to Sonia's, to other artists from across the circumpolar Arctic and with the Amazon. So I really, really was excited to be working with you and seeing you this fall. I also wanted to thank all of you in the audience for joining us today in the Arctic Amazon Exchange Workshop on this kind of a contact zones of many sorts. And I think that Tanya's really addressed that in many ways, not always in terms of contact with outsiders and newcomers and settlers, but rather with old friends and old relatives, right? And that are in museums. And I think that's another kind of contact zone that Tanya was talking about. And so I wanted to thank you for that. I should say that this workshop is hosted once again by OCAD University in relation to Social Science and Humanities Council's Connections Grant that enabled us to have this series, as well to the Power Plant Gallery of Contemporary Art here in Toronto. I'd like to acknowledge our staff because they've been so committed over the past few years and working on these projects. And also the university, the OCAD University's IT department, who enabled this conversation for us today, and who really do Alliance work of behind the scenes to enable us to actually have something that is successful. I'd like also to say that I think folks out there can join us. For more information, they could go on our website, wapatah.com. And apparently you could follow us as well on Instagram. I'm not exactly sure how to say it, if it's wapatah.ocadu, O-C-A-D-U. If that's the case, do that and follow us there, and where we'll be posting dates, updates in future workshops. We have a couple more workshops from our friends from the Amazon in South America that will be coming up shortly. So keep an eye on the dates there, and we'll be sending them out to you. And then, of course, the exhibition on the 30th of September at the Power Plant Gallery of Contemporary Art. As well, we have an ancillary collateral event that's going to happen at the Ryerson Image Center. So the international collaboration of artists, as I said, that we're bringing them together. I'll just read a couple names of artists who are going to be there. Besides Tanya, there's Shernoe Hakahiwe, Cuisine Van Wavelen, Emerson Uriah, Sonia Kelleher-Combs, Olinda Silvano, Marit and Sarah, Uti Pieski, Pia Arca, and many others. So we look forward to seeing you there even on our next workshops. And thank you for attending this workshop today. And I bid you all a great day. Thank you, Tanya. And thank you, Nina. Bye-bye.